The scream came from the nursery, and Duke Alistair Thornwood took the stairs 2 at a time, his heart pounding harder than it had in years. He had only just returned to Thornwood Hall that afternoon, his boots still dusty from the long ride, his coat still smelling of horse and rain. He had not even changed his clothes before the sound reached him through the thick walls of his ancestral home. It was not truly a scream, it was something softer, something worse. It was the sound of a small girl crying, in a way that suggested she had been crying for a very long time, and had simply learned to do it quietly, so no one would notice. He pushed open the nursery door and stopped. His daughter, Lily, only 6 years old, sat curled on the floor beside the cold fireplace, her small arms wrapped around her knees. Beside her knelt her governess, Eleanor Hartley, holding the child close, whispering words too soft for him to hear. Eleanor's own eyes were wet, and her voice trembled, even as she tried to comfort the little girl in her arms. Neither of them noticed him standing in the doorway. Alistair remained frozen, his hand still on the doorframe, understanding all at once how far removed he had become from his own household. He had been gone for nearly 4 months, settling matters at his late father's estates in the north, and in that time, it seemed his daughter had wept more nights than he cared to imagine. He had told himself the arrangements were necessary. He had told himself Lily was well cared for, that the staff would see to her needs, that grief was something a man handled alone, at a distance, so as not to burden a child with it. He saw now how wrong he had been. "She misses her mother," Eleanor said softly, still unaware of him. "It is all right to miss her, Lily. It means you loved her very much." "But Papa does not miss her," Lily said between sniffles. "He never speaks of her. He never comes home." The words struck Alistair like a blow to the chest. He wanted to step forward, to correct her, to tell her that he thought of her mother every single day, that his silence was not indifference but a wound, too deep to touch without breaking apart entirely. But his feet would not move. He simply stood there, watching the governess hold his daughter as though she were her own, watching the tenderness in her face, watching the way she stroked Lily's hair with the practiced patience of someone who had done this many nights before, alone, without anyone to help her. He thought of his betrothed, Lady Constance Ashworth, waiting for him downstairs even now, likely already annoyed that he had gone straight to the nursery instead of greeting her properly. He thought of how many months it had been since Constance had asked after Lily at all. Eleanor finally noticed him. She startled, quickly wiping her eyes with the back of her hand, rising to her feet with Lily still clinging to her skirts. "Your Grace," she said, her voice catching. "Forgive me, I did not hear you arrive." "Do not apologize," Alistair said, his own voice rougher than he intended. "Please, continue." But the moment had already changed. Lily looked up at him with wide, uncertain eyes, as though she did not quite believe he was real, as though a father who came home and simply stood in doorways was a stranger to her now. Alistair felt the truth of that settle over him like a stone. He crossed the room slowly and knelt before his daughter, ignoring the ache in his knees from the long journey, ignoring everything except the small face looking up at him with such careful, guarded hope. "I do miss her," he said quietly. "Every single day. I am sorry I have not said so." Lily's lower lip trembled, and then, without warning, she threw her arms around his neck. Alistair closed his eyes and held his daughter, feeling something in his chest loosen for the first time in longer than he could remember. Behind them, Eleanor quietly stepped back to give them privacy, though Alistair noticed she did not leave the room entirely. She busied herself tidying a shelf of picture books, her back turned, though he suspected it was as much to hide her own emotion as to grant them space. He held Lily until her breathing steadied, until the small hitching sobs faded into quiet sniffles, and then into stillness. When at last she pulled back, she looked at him with the ghost of a smile. "Will you stay tonight, Papa? Will you have supper with me?" "I will," he said, and meant it fully, though he knew Constance would be displeased. Lily's smile grew brighter, and she scrambled off to fetch a wooden horse she wanted to show him, some toy her grandfather had carved for her the previous winter. As she rummaged through a chest in the corner, Alistair rose and turned toward Eleanor, who was watching the exchange with an expression she quickly tried to smooth into something more composed. "Thank you," he said simply. "For what, Your Grace?" "For caring for her. Truly caring for her. I see now that you have done more for my daughter these past months than I have in the 2 years since her mother passed." Eleanor shook her head, She is a wonderful child, your grace. It is no burden to love her. There was something in the plainness of the statement that struck him. Not flattery, not performance, simply truth, spoken without calculation. He was not accustomed to such honesty in his household, surrounded as he was by servants who measured every word for how it might please him, and a betrothed who measured every word for how it might advance her own position. "How long has she been crying like this?" he asked. "In the evenings, I mean." Eleanor hesitated, clearly weighing how much to say. "Some nights are harder than others, your grace. She often asks about her mother. She worries that if she stops thinking of her, her mother will be forgotten entirely." Alistair felt the words settle heavily in his chest. "And what do you tell her?" "That love does not fade simply because time passes. That remembering someone is not a burden, but a gift we give them." Eleanor paused, glancing toward Lily, who was still occupied with her wooden horse. "I hope I have not overstepped, your grace. It is not my place to speak on such matters," but she asked, and I could not bring myself to give her an empty answer. "You have not overstepped," Alistair said. "You have done what I should have done myself, had I been present enough to notice she needed it." A soft knock interrupted them before Eleanor could respond. A young housemaid appeared in the doorway, curtsying quickly. "Your Grace, Lady Constance requests your presence in the drawing room. She says supper is nearly ready, and she has been waiting." Alistair felt the familiar tightening in his shoulders that came whenever Constance's name was mentioned, a sensation he had grown so used to that he rarely questioned it anymore. He glanced back at Lily, who had turned at the sound of the maid's voice, her small face falling slightly. "Tell Lady Constance I will join her shortly," he said. "But first, I intend to have supper with my daughter." The maid's eyebrows rose slightly in surprise, before she caught herself and curtsied again, hurrying off to deliver the message. Eleanor watched the exchange with careful neutrality, though Alistair thought he caught the faintest flicker of approval in her eyes. "You need not stay for this, Miss Hartley," he said. "I imagine you have had a long day." "I do not mind staying, your grace, if it pleases Lily to have us both." He looked at her for a moment longer than was strictly necessary, taking in the simplicity of her dress, the quiet steadiness in her manner, so unlike the practiced elegance of Constance. There was nothing showy about Eleanor Hartley. She did not seem to want anything from him beyond the well-being of the child in her care. It was, he realized, a rare thing in his life, and rarer still that he had failed to notice it until this very evening. Supper in the nursery was a simple affair, bread and soup and a small dish of stewed fruit that Lily ate with great enthusiasm once she realized her father intended to stay for the entire meal. Alistair found himself laughing, actually laughing, for what felt like the first time in months, as Lily recounted an elaborate story involving her wooden horse, a make-believe kingdom, and a dragon that Eleanor apparently helped her invent during quieter afternoons. He watched Eleanor throughout the meal, noting the way she guided the conversation gently when Lily grew too excited, the way she corrected her manners without scolding, the way she made even the smallest moments feel warm and unhurried. It was clear to him that this woman had given his daughter something he had failed to provide, not through any lack of love on his part, but through the paralysis of his own grief. When the meal ended and Lily grew drowsy, rubbing her eyes and leaning against her father's side, Eleanor rose to prepare her for bed. Alistair carried his daughter to her small bed himself, tucking the blankets around her the way he vaguely remembered his own mother doing for him when he was a boy. Lily was asleep before he finished, her breathing slow and even, her small face peaceful in a way it had not been when he first entered the room. He stood watching her for a long moment before turning to find Eleanor waiting quietly by the door, allowing him this private moment with his child. "Thank you again," he said softly, stepping out into the corridor and closing the door gently behind him. "There is no need to thank me for doing my duty, your grace." It seemed like far more than duty tonight. Eleanor's cheeks colored slightly, and she looked away. "Lily is easy to love. I have grown quite fond of her, if I may be so bold as to say so." "You may," Alistair said. "I am glad she has you." They stood in the quiet corridor for a moment, the candlelight flickering against the old stone walls, and Alistair felt an unfamiliar warmth settle over him, something he could not quite name but did not wish to examine too closely. It was Eleanor who broke the silence first, curtsying briefly. "I should retire for the evening, your grace. Lady Constance is likely still waiting for you." The mention of Constance's name pulled him back to the present, and he felt the weight of obligation settle over his shoulders once more. Yes, of course. Good night, Miss Hartley. Good night, Your Grace. He watched her walk down the corridor toward the servants' stairs, before turning himself toward the drawing room, where he knew Constance would be waiting with her particular brand of polished impatience. As he walked, he found his thoughts lingering not on the woman he was engaged to marry, but on the quiet governess who had wept alongside his daughter, without ever expecting to be seen doing so. Constance was seated by the fire when he entered, her golden hair perfectly arranged, her gown a deep shade of blue that suited her fair complexion. She rose when she saw him, offering a smile that did not quite reach her eyes. You are very late, Alistair. I began to think you had forgotten I was here at all. Forgive me, he said, though the apology felt hollow even as he spoke it. I was with Lily. She had a difficult evening. Constance's smile tightened almost imperceptibly. Children have difficult evenings quite often, I am told. Surely the governess is paid well enough to manage such things without requiring your presence. Alistair felt a flicker of irritation at the dismissiveness in her tone, though he said nothing of it, choosing instead to take a seat across from her. She is my daughter, Constance. I intend to be more present in her life going forward. Of course, Constance said smoothly, though something flickered behind her eyes that he did not quite recognize. I only meant that our wedding preparations require your attention as well. The invitations must be finalized within the fortnight if we are to keep to the date I proposed. I have not forgotten, he said, though in truth, he had thought of little else besides Lily and the tearful scene he had witnessed in the nursery since arriving home. We can discuss the details tomorrow, if that suits you. I find myself quite tired from the journey. Constance's expression flickered with something like frustration before smoothing back into practiced calm. Of course, Alistair, whatever you wish. He excused himself shortly after, retiring to his chambers with his mind still turning over the events of the evening. As he lay in the darkness, unable to sleep, he found himself thinking not of his impending marriage, but of the governess who had held his weeping daughter with such gentle devotion, and of the strange, unfamiliar warmth that had stirred in him at the sight. He told himself it meant nothing beyond gratitude. He told himself many things that night, though sleep, when it finally came, brought with it dreams he could not quite remember upon waking, save for the lingering impression of soft brown eyes and a voice speaking words of comfort in a darkened nursery. The following morning, Alistair woke earlier than he had in months, driven by a restlessness he could not entirely explain. He found himself dressing quickly and making his way toward the nursery before he had even properly broken his fast, drawn by some instinct he did not pause to examine too closely. He found Lily already awake, sitting at a small table with Eleanor, practicing her letters on a slate. The morning light streamed through the tall windows, catching dust motes in golden shafts, and for a moment, Alistair simply stood in the doorway, watching the peaceful scene before him. Lily spotted him first, her face lighting with unguarded delight. "Papa, come see what I have written." He crossed the room and knelt beside her, examining the careful, childish letters scrawled across the slate. She had written her own name, and beneath it, in slightly crooked script, the word Papa. "That is very well done," he said, and meant it, feeling a surge of pride entirely disproportionate to the achievement, though no less genuine for it. "Miss Hartley taught me," Lily said proudly, glancing toward her governess. "She learns quickly," Eleanor said, a soft smile touching her lips. "She has a keen mind for a child her age." Alistair looked between the two of them, struck once again by how easily this woman had woven herself into the fabric of his daughter's happiness, how much lighter the room felt simply for her presence within it. He thought of Constance's dismissive words from the previous evening, and felt a fresh wave of irritation on Eleanor's behalf, though he said nothing of it. "I thought perhaps," he said instead, "that we might take a walk in the garden this morning, before my duties require my attention. Would you care to join us, Miss Hartley?" Eleanor glanced at him with faint surprise, clearly not expecting the invitation. "If it pleases you, Your Grace, I would be glad to." Lily clapped her hands together with delight, already scrambling to fetch her small coat from its hook by the door. Alistair watched her go, and then turned back to Eleanor, who was gathering the slate and chalk with careful, unhurried movements. "I meant what I said last night," he told her quietly, before Lily returned. I am grateful for all you have done for her. I do not believe I have expressed that gratitude adequately until now. You need not repeat yourself, Your Grace, Eleanor said, though her cheeks colored slightly at the renewed praise. I only wish to see her happy. As do I, Alistair said. It seems of late that I have needed reminding of how to achieve that. Eleanor met his gaze then, and for a brief moment, something passed between them that neither seemed quite prepared to name. An understanding, perhaps, or the beginning of one. It was Lily's return, breathless and already chattering about which flowers she hoped were blooming, that broke the moment, and the three of them made their way down toward the garden together, leaving behind, for now, the shadows that had settled over Thornwood Hall in the years since its mistress had passed. As they walked, Alistair found himself laughing more freely than he had in longer than he could recall, watching his daughter chase after a butterfly, while Eleanor called gentle warnings about the uneven garden paths. He did not yet understand the full shape of what was beginning to take root within him, nor did he suspect the storm that waited quietly on the horizon, disguised behind Constance Ashworth's carefully composed smiles. For now, there was only the sunlight, his daughter's laughter, and the quiet, steady presence of a woman who had shown him, without ever intending to, what true devotion looked like. That evening, however, as he made his way back toward the house, a folded letter was delivered into his hands by a servant who claimed it had arrived by private courier that afternoon. Alistair broke the seal absently, still smiling faintly at the memory of the morning, only for his expression to shift as he read the contents. The letter was brief, unsigned, and troubling. It warned him, in careful and deliberately vague language, that not everyone within his household could be trusted, and that he would do well to examine more closely the circumstances surrounding matters he believed long settled. Alistair stood in the fading light of the corridor, the letter trembling slightly in his grip, uncertain what to make of such a cryptic warning, or who might have sent it, or what exactly it was meant to reveal. He folded it carefully and slipped it into his coat, telling himself it was likely nothing more than idle mischief from some disgruntled servant or rival. But as he made his way toward his chambers that night, the warmth of the day's earlier moments now tempered by unease, he could not entirely shake the feeling that something beneath the surface of his ordered life had begun, quietly and deliberately, to unravel. Alistair did not sleep well that night. The cryptic letter sat folded in his coat pocket, its careless handwriting and vague warning circling through his mind long after the candles had burned low. He rose before dawn, dressed without calling for his valet, and made his way down to the study, where he sat for a long while simply staring at the letter spread flat upon his desk. Who could have sent it? And what exactly did they mean by circumstances he believed long settled? He turned the phrase over and over, searching his memory for anything that might explain it, but nothing surfaced beyond vague unease. He thought first of enemies from his father's time, old rivalries over land or title that sometimes resurfaced in petty, anonymous cruelty. He thought next, briefly and uncomfortably, of Constance, though he dismissed the notion almost as quickly as it arose. She was ambitious, certainly, and at times colder than he might have wished in a future wife, but he could think of no reason anyone would write to warn him against her specifically. He folded the letter away and told himself he would think on it later, when his mind was clearer. For now, there were estate matters requiring his attention, correspondence from his steward, decisions about tenant leases that had waited too long already during his absence. He forced himself through the morning's work, with only partial success, his concentration repeatedly drifting back to the strange letter, and, more pleasantly, to the memory of the previous day's walk in the garden. By mid-morning, restless and unable to focus further, he made his way toward the nursery once more, telling himself it was simply his duty as a father to check on his daughter's progress. He found Lily seated at her small table, carefully copying letters onto her slate, while Eleanor read quietly from a book of simple stories nearby. The scene struck him again with its quiet warmth, so different from the cold formality that had settled over Thornwood Hall in recent years. "Papa," Lily called brightly, the moment she noticed him, abandoning her slate to run toward him. He caught her easily, lifting her for a moment before setting her back down. "You are working hard, I see," he said, glancing at the careful rows of letters on her slate. "Miss Hartley says, if I practice every day, I shall write as well as a grown lady by winter." "I have no doubt of it," Alistair said, smiling despite the unease that still lingered from his sleepless night. Eleanor rose from her chair, setting the book aside. Your Grace, I did not expect you this morning. I find myself in need of pleasant company, he admitted, surprising himself with the honesty of the statement. The estate ledgers are not the most cheerful of companions. A faint smile touched Eleanor's lips. I imagine not. Though I confess, Lily has been asking whether you might join us again for the garden walk this afternoon, if your duties permit. They shall permit it, Alistair said, before he could think better of committing himself so readily. Lily's delighted squeal was reward enough for the decision, and he found the tightness in his chest, born of the sleepless night and the strange letter, easing somewhat in the face of his daughter's happiness. He remained in the nursery longer than he intended, watching Lily complete her letters, listening as Eleanor gently corrected her grip on the chalk, explaining patiently why certain letters curved the way they did. There was something deeply restful about the simplicity of it all, a stillness he had not realized he craved, until he found himself immersed in it. It was nearing midday when a servant appeared at the nursery door, informing him that Lady Constance had arrived unannounced and was waiting for him in the drawing room, having expressed some impatience at his absence. Alistair rose reluctantly, aware of the shift in Eleanor's expression at the mention of Constance's name, though she said nothing, simply returning her attention to Lily's lesson with practiced composure. He found Constance pacing near the window when he entered the drawing room, her expression sharp despite the pleasant smile she quickly arranged upon seeing him. Alistair, I had thought we might discuss the wedding arrangements this morning, as agreed. Forgive me, I lost track of the hour, he said, taking a seat across from her. I was with Lily. Something flickered across Constance's face, quickly smoothed away. You seem to spend a great deal of time in the nursery of late. I confess I had not expected such devotion, given how little attention you paid the child before your journey north. The comment landed with more sting than perhaps Constance intended, though Alistair suspected, given the faint edge in her tone, that it had been deliberately chosen. I regret my previous absence, he said evenly. I intend to correct it. Of course, Constance said, her smile returning, though it did not reach her eyes. It is admirable, truly, though I do wonder whether the governess encourages such closeness for reasons beyond simple duty. Servants often seek to make themselves indispensable, you understand. It secures their position. Alistair felt a flash of irritation at the insinuation, though he kept his expression carefully neutral. Miss Hartley has done nothing but care for my daughter with genuine devotion. I would ask that you not speak of her so uncharitably. Constance's eyes narrowed slightly before she recovered her composure, inclining her head in a gesture of concession that did not entirely mask the tension beneath it. Forgive me. I only wish to see your interests protected, Alistair. As your future wife, it is my concern as much as yours. They spoke for the better part of an hour regarding wedding preparations, guest lists, and the arrangement of the ceremony itself, though Alistair found his attention repeatedly drifting, his thoughts circling back to the strange letter still folded in his coat pocket, and to Constance's pointed remarks about Eleanor. He could not shake the sense that something beneath the surface of the conversation remained unspoken, some current of tension he did not yet fully understand. When Constance finally departed, promising to return within the week to finalize the remaining details, Alistair remained in the drawing room a while longer, turning her words over in his mind. Servants often seek to make themselves indispensable. It was a strange thing to say about a woman who had shown nothing but quiet, unassuming devotion to his daughter. He wondered, not for the first time, why Constance seemed so determined to cast suspicion upon Eleanor, and the wondering left him uneasy in a way he could not quite articulate. True to his word, he joined Lily and Eleanor in the garden that afternoon, the earlier tension of the day fading somewhat beneath the warmth of the sun and his daughter's cheerful chatter. Lily led them along the winding paths with great authority, pointing out which flowers she considered her favorites, and which she believed to be secretly enchanted, a notion Eleanor had apparently encouraged during quieter afternoons spent reading fairy stories together. As Lily ran ahead to examine a particularly interesting patch of clover, Alistair found himself walking beside Eleanor in companionable silence, the kind he rarely experienced with anyone else in his life. "May I ask you something?" he said finally, "and trust that you will answer honestly." Eleanor glanced at him with faint curiosity. "Of course, Your Grace. Has Lady Constance ever spoken to you in a manner you found troubling? Threatened your position, perhaps, or spoken unkindly?" He watched carefully as something flickered across Eleanor's face, quickly schooled into careful neutrality. "It is not my place to speak against Lady Constance, your grace." "That is not what I asked." Eleanor was quiet for a long moment, her gaze fixed on Lily as the child crouched to examine something in the grass. "There have been moments," she said carefully. "Lady Constance has made her opinion of my presence in the household known on occasion. I have not taken it to heart. It is not uncommon for those in service to encounter such attitudes from those above their station." "That is not an acceptable excuse for poor treatment," Alistair said, more sharply than he intended. "I did not say it was acceptable, your grace. Only that it is not unusual." Eleanor's tone remained gentle, though he could sense the careful restraint beneath it. "I would ask that you not trouble yourself on my account. My position here is secure, so long as Lily requires my care, and that is enough for me." Alistair said nothing further on the matter, though the conversation lingered with him for the remainder of the afternoon, deepening the unease that had begun with the anonymous letter and grown steadily throughout the day's interactions with Constance. He found himself watching Eleanor with new attentiveness, noting the quiet dignity with which she carried herself, despite whatever unkindness she had evidently endured, and feeling, with each passing hour, a growing sense that the woman he was engaged to marry was not entirely what she presented herself to be. That evening, after Lily had been put to bed and the household had settled into its nightly quiet, Alistair retreated once more to his study, drawing the anonymous letter from his coat pocket and reading it again by candlelight. Not everyone within his household could be trusted. He thought of Constance's carefully chosen words about Eleanor, of the flicker of something sharp behind her polished smiles, and felt, for the first time, a genuine suspicion take root, where before there had only been vague unease. He resolved, quietly and without informing anyone of his intentions, to watch more closely in the days ahead. Whatever truth lay hidden beneath the surface of his household, he intended to uncover it, whatever the cost to the arrangements he had already set in motion. He did not yet know how far that resolve would take him, nor how thoroughly it would reshape everything he believed to be true about the woman he had agreed to marry, and the quiet governess who had, without ever intending to, begun to occupy a growing place in his heart. Days passed, and Alistair found the rhythm of his household shifting in ways that surprised him. He rose early each morning, drawn not by duty alone, but by genuine eagerness, to spend time with Lily before the demands of the estate claimed his attention. He learned the small details of her days, the games she favored, the stories that made her laugh, the particular way she liked her hair braided before bed. He learned, too, though he did not speak of it aloud, how much of his daughter's happiness he owed to the quiet, steady presence of Eleanor Hartley. He began to notice things about his own household he had overlooked during the long months of his grief, the way the servants seemed to relax when Constance was absent, and grow careful, almost guarded, whenever she arrived. The way Mrs. Whitfield, the housekeeper who had served the family for over 20 years, would sometimes exchange a quick, wary glance with the butler, Mr. Barrow, whenever Constance issued instructions that contradicted his own. He had dismissed such observations before as nothing more than the ordinary friction of a large household adjusting to a new mistress, but now, with the anonymous letter still weighing on his mind, he found himself paying closer attention. One afternoon, while reviewing correspondence in his study, he overheard raised voices drifting from the corridor outside. He recognized Constance's voice immediately, sharp and clipped in a way she never allowed him to hear directly. He rose quietly and moved toward the door, listening before he made his presence known. "You will do as I instruct," Constance was saying, her tone cold. "The child does not require quite so much of your attention. There are other duties within this household that have gone neglected." "Forgive me, my lady," came Eleanor's voice, calm but firm. "But my duties are set by His Grace, not by yourself. Lily's education and well-being are my responsibility, and I intend to see to them properly." "Your responsibility," Constance repeated, with a faint, unpleasant laugh. "You would do well to remember your position here is not permanent, Miss Hartley. Governesses come and go with far greater ease than you might imagine." Alistair had heard enough. He opened the study door and stepped into the corridor, and the effect on both women was immediate. Constance's expression shifted instantly into practiced composure, while Eleanor, caught between them, lowered her gaze respectfully, though he did not miss the flash of relief that crossed her features at his arrival. "Is something amiss?" he asked, his voice carrying an edge he made no effort to soften. Nothing at all, Alistair, Constance said smoothly. I was merely discussing household matters with Miss Hartley. It did not sound like a discussion, he said. It sounded a great deal like a threat. Constance's composure faltered slightly, though she recovered quickly, offering him a look of wounded innocence that he was beginning to recognize as entirely performed. You misunderstand, my love. I only meant to remind Miss Hartley of the proper hierarchy within a household, as any future mistress must. Miss Hartley answers to me, Alistair said, his tone leaving no room for argument. Her position within this household is not yours to threaten, now or after our marriage. I would ask that you remember that going forward. A tense silence followed his words. Constance's eyes flickered with something sharp and unreadable, before she inclined her head in a stiff nod. Of course, Alistair. Forgive my overstepping. She turned and swept down the corridor without another word, her skirts snapping behind her with barely restrained irritation. Alistair turned to Eleanor, who remained standing quietly, her hands folded in front of her, though he could see the faint tremor in them that betrayed how shaken she truly was by the exchange. Are you all right? He asked gently. I am, Your Grace. Thank you for your intervention. It was not necessary, but I am grateful nonetheless. It was entirely necessary, Alistair said. No one should speak to you in such a manner within my household. I intend to see it does not happen again. Eleanor offered a small, grateful smile, though worry still lingered in her eyes. I do not wish to cause difficulty between yourself and Lady Constance, Your Grace. Perhaps it would be simplest if I kept a greater distance, so as not to invite such tension. No, Alistair said, more firmly than he intended. Lily needs you. I have come to see how much she needs you, these past days. I will not have you diminish your role in her life to soothe Constance's insecurities. The word insecurities seemed to surprise them both, hanging in the air between them, as Alistair realized he had spoken more plainly than he intended. Eleanor said nothing, though her expression suggested she understood precisely what he meant, and perhaps had understood it long before he did himself. That evening, once Lily had been settled for the night, Alistair found himself unable to shake the unease that had followed him throughout the day. He thought of the anonymous letter, of Constance's thinly veiled threats toward Eleanor, of the strange defensiveness she displayed whenever the governess's name arose. None of it, taken individually, amounted to proof of anything, yet together, it painted a picture he found increasingly difficult to ignore. He resolved, that night, to speak with Mrs. Whitfield, the one member of his household he trusted implicitly, having known her since his own childhood. He found her in the small sitting room off the kitchens, mending linens by candlelight, and she rose immediately upon seeing him, though he waved her back into her seat. Forgive the late hour, he said, settling into the chair across from her. I find myself in need of honest counsel, and I know of no one within this household more likely to provide it than yourself. Mrs. Whitfield set aside her mending, studying him with the careful, knowing expression of a woman who had watched him grow from boyhood into manhood. You may ask me anything, Your Grace. You know that. What do you make of Lady Constance? The question hung in the air for a long moment before Mrs. Whitfield answered, choosing her words with evident care. It is not my place to speak against your intended bride, Your Grace. I am not asking for gossip. I am asking for your honest observation, as someone who has served this household faithfully for many years. Mrs. Whitfield hesitated a moment longer, before sighing softly. She is not unkind to those she believes can advance her position, Your Grace. But I have seen how she treats those she deems beneath her notice, and it troubles me. Miss Hartley, in particular, has borne the brunt of her displeasure more than once, though the girl has never spoken a word of complaint against her. Has this happened often? More often than you might realize, Your Grace, given how frequently you have been occupied elsewhere these past months. I did not think it my place to burden you with such matters, given your own grief, but I confess, I have grown concerned. Alistair absorbed this in silence, the weight of his own absence settling over him once more. He had been so consumed by his sorrow, so determined to manage his household from a careful, controlled distance, that he had allowed unkindness to take root beneath his own roof without ever noticing. Thank you for your honesty, he said finally. I intend to look more closely into these matters going forward. Mrs. Whitfield nodded, though something in her expression suggested she wished to say more, and had chosen, out of long habit and discretion, to hold her tongue. Alistair did not press her further that evening, though he left the conversation with a growing certainty that whatever truth lay hidden within his household extended far beyond a few sharp words exchanged in a corridor. He returned to his study once more before retiring, drawing out the anonymous letter and reading it again, this time with fresh eyes. Not everyone within his household could be trusted. He thought of Constance's carefully composed smiles, of the flicker of something cold and calculating he had begun to notice beneath them, and felt, for the first time, a genuine determination take hold within him. Whatever secrets Constance Ashworth carried, he intended to uncover them, and he intended to protect, in the process, the two people within his household who had shown him nothing but genuine, unguarded devotion. The days that followed brought a new carefulness to Thornwood Hall, though it went largely unspoken. Alistair found himself observing his household with a vigilance he had never before thought necessary, watching the small interactions between Constance and the staff, noting the moments when her polished manner slipped to reveal something colder underneath. He said nothing of his growing suspicions to anyone save Mrs. Whitfield, though even with her he remained cautious, unwilling to voice accusations he could not yet prove. It was on a quiet afternoon, while searching his late father's old study for a deed related to a boundary dispute with a neighboring estate, that Alistair made a discovery that would alter the course of everything that followed. The document he sought was not in the drawers where he expected it, and in his search, he opened a small writing desk that had once belonged to his father, and now stood largely unused in the corner of the room, a piece of furniture Constance had claimed for her own correspondence during her visits. He had not intended to pry. He told himself this many times in the days that followed, though the justification did little to ease the discomfort of what he found. Tucked beneath a stack of ordinary correspondence, folded and creased as though handled many times, was a letter written in Constance's own hand, unfinished and unsent, addressed to no one in particular. He should not have read it. He knew this even as his eyes moved across the first lines, and yet he could not stop himself, drawn forward by a growing sense of dread that seemed to confirm every uneasy suspicion of the past weeks. The letter spoke, in careful, guarded language, of a necessary deception, of steps taken to secure what the writer described as her rightful place, and of concerns that certain truths, once buried, might yet resurface if she was not careful. Near the bottom of the page, in smaller, more hurried script, Eleanor's name appeared, alongside a phrase that chilled him considerably. She must not be permitted to remain long enough to become inconvenient. Alistair sat in his father's old chair for a long while, the letter trembling slightly in his hands, his mind racing through possibilities he did not wish to entertain. What deception? What rightful place? And why, above all, did Constance consider Eleanor's continued presence within the household something to be so carefully managed, even feared? He folded the letter and placed it, along with the anonymous warning he had received weeks earlier, into a locked drawer of his own desk, uncertain, yet how to proceed. He knew he could not confront Constance directly, without more concrete understanding of what she had done, or what she believed herself capable of losing, should certain truths come to light. He resolved, instead, to continue watching, to gather what evidence he could before acting, though the waiting itself proved a considerable trial to his patience. That evening, he found himself once again in the nursery, watching Lily complete her evening prayers, under Eleanor's gentle guidance, before being tucked into bed. He lingered afterward, as had become his habit, and found Eleanor waiting for him in the corridor, once Lily had drifted to sleep. "You seem troubled tonight, Your Grace," she observed, her expression gentle with concern. "It is nothing you need worry over," he said, though the words felt inadequate, given the weight of what he now carried. "Tell me, Miss Hartley, how did you come to be governess in this household? I confess I know little of the circumstances of your appointment." Eleanor seemed surprised by the question, though she answered readily enough. "Your late wife hired me herself, Your Grace, shortly before Lily's second birthday. She wished for someone gentle but firm, someone who would love the child as her own. I have tried, in the years since, to honor that trust." "Did you know my wife well?" A soft sadness passed over Eleanor's features. "As well as a governess might know her mistress, I suppose. She was kind to me, Your Grace, kinder than most in her position would have been. I was very sorry when she passed." "Did she ever speak to you of Lady Constance?" Eleanor's expression shifted, something guarded entering her eyes. "Your Grace, I do not think it my place to—" "Please." Alistair said, more urgently than he intended. I am not asking out of idle curiosity. I have reason to believe there is more to Lady Constance's history within this household than I have been told, and I trust your honesty above nearly anyone else's. Eleanor hesitated a long moment, clearly weighing her words carefully. Your late wife mentioned Lady Constance to me on occasion, Your Grace, though never at great length. I recall she seemed troubled by certain rumors that circulated in her final months. Rumors she believed had been deliberately spread to damage her standing among her friends. She never named their source directly to me, though I confess, I always wondered. Alistair felt a cold weight settle in his chest. What sort of rumors? Rumors questioning her fidelity, Your Grace. Suggestions that she had formed an improper attachment outside the marriage. I never believed a word of it myself. She loved you and Lily dearly, and spoke of nothing but her devotion to this family in the time I knew her. But the rumors caused her great distress in her final months. Distress I have often thought contributed to the decline in her health before her passing. Alistair stood in stunned silence, the pieces of a picture he had never fully understood, beginning, slowly and horribly, to assemble themselves before him. He thought of his wife's final months, of the withdrawn sadness that had settled over her in those last weeks, sadness he had attributed, in his own grief and confusion, to illness alone. He had never once considered that external cruelty might have played a role in deepening her suffering. Thank you, he said finally, his voice rough, for telling me this. I hope I have not spoken out of turn, Your Grace. You have not. You have told me something I needed very badly to know. He looked at her for a long moment, gratitude and something deeper, something he still could not fully name, warring within him. I intend to look further into this matter. I would ask that you say nothing of our conversation to anyone, particularly Lady Constance. You have my word, Your Grace. He returned to his study that night, and sat for hours with the unfinished letter spread before him, along with the anonymous warning, turning over every possibility, every fragment of information he had gathered. A necessary deception, rumors that damaged his late wife's standing among her friends, concerns about truths resurfacing. The pieces suggested something far darker than simple ambition or jealousy, something deliberate and calculated, carried out over a span of years. He did not yet possess proof enough to confront Constance directly, but he understood, with growing certainty, that he could no longer proceed toward marriage without first uncovering the full truth of what she had done, and what role, if any, she had played in the sorrow that had shadowed his wife's final months. Whatever the cost to his own reputation, or to the arrangements already set in motion, he resolved to see the matter through to its end, however painful that end might prove to be. Alistair decided that his first step must be to speak with those who had known his late wife best during her final months, particularly the friends whose affection she had reportedly lost amid the rumors Eleanor had described. He remembered, with some effort, the names of two women his wife had corresponded with regularly in the years before her passing, Lady Margaret Fenwick and Mrs. Charlotte Ellery, both of whom lived within a day's ride of Thornwood Hall. He sent word ahead, requesting a visit, and within days, found himself received in Lady Fenwick's drawing room, a comfortable space filled with the particular warmth of a home well loved. Lady Fenwick, a woman of perhaps 50 years with sharp, observant eyes, greeted him with evident surprise at the unexpected visit, though she welcomed him graciously enough. Your Grace, this is quite unexpected. What brings you to my door after so long an absence from society? I hope you will forgive my directness, Lady Fenwick, but I find myself in need of understanding certain events from my late wife's final months. I understand you were close friends at one time. Something shifted in Lady Fenwick's expression, a flicker of old grief mixed with something more guarded. We were close, yes, until circumstances rather complicated our friendship. What circumstances? Lady Fenwick hesitated, clearly reluctant to revisit painful territory. Your Grace, I do not wish to speak ill of the dead, nor to cause you further sorrow so long after her passing. Please, Alistair said. I have recently come to believe that certain rumors circulated about my late wife during her final months, rumors that may have caused her considerable distress. I need to understand their origin. Lady Fenwick studied him for a long moment, before sighing softly, gesturing for him to take a seat. Very well, Your Grace. Though I warn you, the truth may not sit easily with you. In the final year of her life, certain stories began circulating within our circle. suggesting your wife had formed an improper attachment to a gentleman outside her marriage. I did not believe them myself, not truly, but the rumors were persistent enough, and detailed enough, that many within our circle grew cautious of associating too closely with her, myself included, to my great and lasting regret. Do you know who first spread these rumors? I could not say with certainty, Your Grace, though I recall that Lady Constance Ashworth was often present when such stories first began to circulate. She was, at the time, a frequent guest at gatherings your wife also attended, and I recall her speaking of certain observations she claimed to have made, always phrased carefully, always suggesting concern rather than accusation. Yet somehow, the substance of her words traveled swiftly and grew more damaging with each retelling. Alistair felt the cold weight in his chest deepen into something closer to fury. You believe Lady Constance deliberately spread these rumors? I cannot say what her intentions were, Your Grace. Only that she seemed present at their origin more often than mere coincidence would suggest, and that she never once, to my knowledge, spoke in your wife's defense when the stories grew particularly cruel. Lady Fenwick's expression softened with genuine sympathy. Your wife was a kind and devoted woman, Your Grace. I have long regretted not standing more firmly by her side when the rumors grew fierce. I did not understand, until it was too late, how much they had wounded her. Alistair thanked Lady Fenwick for her honesty, and departed shortly after, his mind heavy with the weight of what he had learned. He visited Mrs. Ellery the following day, and though her account differed slightly in its particulars, the substance remained largely the same. Constance Ashworth had been present, again and again, at the origin of rumors that had ultimately isolated his wife from her closest friends during the final, loneliest months of her life. He rode back toward Thornwood Hall in silence, his thoughts a tangled storm of grief and rage. He thought of his wife's withdrawn sadness in those final months, sadness he had failed to understand or adequately address, distracted as he had been by the demands of the estate and his own inability to confront the reality of her declining health. He had believed, all this time, that her sorrow stemmed purely from illness. He had never once considered that deliberate cruelty had played a role in deepening her suffering. Cruelty orchestrated, it now seemed, by the very woman he had agreed to marry in her place. Upon returning to Thornwood Hall, he found himself unable to face Constance immediately, uncertain he could maintain sufficient composure to confront her without the further evidence he still required. Instead, he made his way to the nursery, drawn once more by the need for the quiet comfort he had come to associate with his daughter and her governess. He found Eleanor alone, tidying the nursery after Lily had already been put to bed for the evening. She looked up at his entrance, her expression shifting quickly to concern at whatever she saw in his face. Your Grace, are you unwell? I have learned something troubling, he said, sinking into a small chair beside the fireplace. About my wife's final months. About the rumors that isolated her from her friends. Eleanor's expression grew grave. And you believe Lady Constance responsible? I have spoken with two women who knew her well during that time. Both confirm that Constance was present at the origin of the rumors, again and again, in ways too consistent to be mere coincidence. He looked up at Eleanor, feeling suddenly and unexpectedly vulnerable, in a way he rarely allowed himself to be. I do not know how to proceed. I do not yet have proof enough to confront her directly, and I fear what such a confrontation might unleash. Eleanor was quiet for a moment, before crossing the room and settling into the chair beside him. Your Grace, I know this is a painful discovery, but I believe you already possess more courage than you credit yourself with. You have shown it these past weeks, in the way you have returned to your daughter, in the way you have sought truth rather than comfortable silence. I have faith you will find the strength to see this through as well. Her words settled over him with unexpected warmth, and he found himself studying her face in the firelight, struck once again by the quiet steadiness that seemed to define everything about her. You have become an unexpected source of comfort to me, Miss Hartley, he said softly. I confess, I did not anticipate finding such solace within my own household, after so long a period of loneliness. Eleanor's cheeks colored, though she did not look away. I have found unexpected comfort as well, Your Grace, in watching you become the father Lily always deserved. It has been a privilege to witness. They sat together in companionable silence for a long while, the fire crackling softly between them, and Alistair felt, despite the weight of everything he had learned that day, a fragile sense of hope beginning to take root within him. Whatever darkness Constance had brought into his household, he no longer faced it entirely alone, and in the quiet governess seated beside him, he found himself recognizing, with growing certainty, the shape of a devotion far more genuine than anything Constance had ever offered him. Alistair spent the following days gathering what further evidence he could, moving carefully so as not to alert Constance to his growing suspicions. He wrote to his solicitor, a discreet and trustworthy man named Mr. Pembroke, requesting information regarding Constance's financial circumstances before their engagement, curious whether ambition alone might explain the lengths she had apparently gone to secure her position within his household. The response, when it arrived, confirmed what he had begun to suspect. Constance's family, though possessing an old and respected name, had fallen into significant debt in the years before her introduction to society. Debt carefully concealed behind an appearance of continued prosperity. Her marriage to a duke would not simply elevate her socially, it would rescue her family from financial ruin entirely. Alistair understood, reading the letter, precisely what motivation might have driven her to eliminate whatever obstacles stood between herself and such an advantageous match, including, it seemed, his own late wife's reputation and happiness. He returned to the locked drawer in his study that evening, drawing out the unfinished letter once more, reading it alongside this new understanding. A necessary deception, steps taken to secure her rightful place. The words took on a far more sinister meaning now, suggesting not merely unkindness, but calculated, sustained manipulation, carried out over a period of years, manipulation that had contributed, however indirectly, to the sorrow that shadowed his wife's final months. He knew he could delay no longer. Whatever pain the confrontation might bring, whatever scandal might follow, he could not in good conscience proceed toward marriage with a woman capable of such deliberate cruelty, nor could he continue permitting her presence within a household that included his daughter and the governess she had so plainly threatened. He sent word requesting Constance's presence at Thornwood Hall the following afternoon, framing the request as a matter of wedding preparations requiring discussion, unwilling to reveal his true purpose until she stood before him. In the meantime, he found himself once more drawn to the nursery, seeking the quiet comfort that had become as necessary to him as breathing in recent weeks. He found Lily and Eleanor in the garden, enjoying the last warm afternoon, before autumn's chill began to settle properly over the estate. Lily ran to greet him immediately, her small face bright with the particular joy that came from a childhood no longer shadowed by neglect. "Papa, look what Miss Hartley taught me," she called, demonstrating an elaborate curtsy she had apparently been practicing for some time. Alistair applauded with genuine delight, momentarily forgetting the weight of the confrontation that awaited him the following day. Eleanor watched the exchange with a soft smile, though something in her expression suggested she sensed the tension he carried beneath his outward composure. Once Lily had run off again to chase a particularly determined butterfly, Eleanor approached him quietly. "You have made a decision, Your Grace. I can see it in your face." "I have," he confirmed. "I intend to confront Constance tomorrow, with all the evidence I have gathered. I do not yet know how she will respond, nor what consequences may follow, but I can no longer proceed without addressing what I have learned." Eleanor's expression grew concerned, though she did not attempt to dissuade him. "I imagine this cannot be easy for you, Your Grace, given how deeply this touches upon your late wife's memory." "It is not easy," he admitted, "but it is necessary. I owe my wife that much, even now, and I owe my daughter a household free from the kind of cruelty Constance has evidently been capable of." He paused, studying Eleanor's face in the afternoon light. "I owe you that as well, Miss Hartley. You have endured far more of her unkindness than I properly understood, until recently, and I regret not addressing it sooner." Eleanor's cheeks colored slightly at the acknowledgement. "You need not concern yourself with my treatment, Your Grace, particularly at such a difficult moment for your own family." "I disagree," Alistair said quietly. "I find myself concerned with a great many things regarding your well-being, Miss Hartley, matters that extend beyond simple gratitude for your care of Lily." He hesitated, aware he was venturing into territory he had not fully allowed himself to examine until this moment, yet finding himself unable to stop. "I have come to value your presence in this household a great deal, more than I perhaps ought to admit given my current circumstances." Eleanor met his gaze, something vulnerable and hopeful flickering across her features, before she carefully composed herself once more. "Your Grace, I believe such matters are best set aside until you have resolved the difficulties currently facing your household. I would not wish to complicate an already painful situation." "You are wise, as always," Alistair said, though something in his chest ached at the necessary delay. "But I wanted you to know, regardless of what tomorrow brings, that your presence here has meant a great deal to me, and to Lily. Whatever happens with Constance, that will not change." They stood together in comfortable silence for a moment longer before Lily's return, breathless and triumphant, having finally caught her butterfly gently within cupped hands, before releasing it with evident satisfaction. The three of them remained in the garden until the sun began its slow descent, and Alistair found himself, despite the difficult confrontation awaiting him the following day, feeling more settled and hopeful than he had in a very long time. That night, after Lily had been put to bed and the household had quieted, Alistair reviewed his evidence one final time, organizing his thoughts for the confrontation ahead. He thought of his late wife, of the sorrow that had shadowed her final months, sorrow he now understood to have been deliberately inflicted, rather than simply the natural consequence of illness. He thought of Eleanor, of the quiet strength and devotion she had shown despite whatever cruelty Constance had directed toward her, and he thought, with growing clarity, of the future he wished to build for his household, a future free from deception and calculated ambition, a future built instead upon genuine care and honest devotion. He did not sleep easily that night, his mind turning over every possible response Constance might offer, every justification she might attempt, yet beneath the anxiety lay a steady resolve that had not wavered since Lady Fenwick first confirmed his growing suspicions. Whatever the confrontation revealed, whatever scandal or difficulty followed, he intended to see it through, for the sake of his late wife's memory, for the sake of his daughter's happiness, and for the sake of the quiet, steady woman who had shown him, without ever intending to, what genuine devotion truly looked like. Constance arrived at Thornwood Hall the following afternoon, in high spirits, evidently believing the summons concerned nothing more than final preparations for the wedding ceremony now less than a month away. She swept into the drawing room in a gown of pale green silk, her expression bright with anticipation, and Alistair felt a fresh wave of anger at the ease with which she carried her deception, unaware that he now understood far more than she suspected. "Alistair, I confess, I am pleased you finally wish to address the remaining arrangements. I had begun to worry your attention had drifted elsewhere." Her gaze flickered briefly, pointedly, toward the direction of the nursery upstairs, though she said nothing further on the matter. "Please, sit," Alistair said, his voice carefully controlled. "There are matters we must discuss, though they concern more than wedding preparations." Constance settled into a chair, her expression shifting slightly at his tone, though she maintained her composure. "You seem troubled, Alistair. Has something happened?" "I have spent the past several days speaking with Lady Fenwick and Mrs. Ellery," he said, watching her face carefully as he spoke. He saw the faint flicker of something sharp cross her features before she smoothed it away, though not quickly enough to escape his notice. "They have told me a great deal about the rumors that circulated regarding my late wife during the final months of her life." Constance's composure faltered visibly now, her hands tightening slightly in her lap. "I do not understand what this has to do with our wedding arrangements." "I believe you understand precisely what it has to do with them," Alistair said, drawing the unfinished letter from his coat pocket and setting it on the table between them. "I found this in my father's old writing desk, the one you have been using for your own correspondence. Perhaps you would care to explain its contents." Constance stared at the letter for a long moment, her face draining of color as recognition dawned. When she finally spoke, her voice had lost much of its earlier confidence. "Where did you find this?" "That is not the question you should be concerned with. The question is whether you deliberately spread rumors about my late wife's fidelity, rumors that isolated her from her closest friends during the final, loneliest months of her life." Constance was silent for a long moment, her eyes darting between the letter and Alistair's face, clearly searching for some means of deflection or denial. "Alistair, you must understand, whatever I may have said or done, it was never intended to cause her genuine harm. I merely wished to—" "To what?" Alistair interrupted, his voice hardening. "To secure your own advancement by destroying her reputation among her friends? To ensure that when illness finally claimed her, she would face her final months in loneliness rather than surrounded by the support she deserved?" "That is not fair," Constance said, her composure finally breaking entirely. "You do not understand the position I was in. My family's fortunes had collapsed entirely. My father faced ruin, disgrace, the loss of everything we had ever known. I needed to secure a match that would save us, and your wife, though I bore her no true ill will, stood between myself and the connections I required to make such a match possible. So you destroyed her reputation instead." "I did not destroy anything," Constance protested, though the denial sounded hollow, even to Alistair's ears. "I merely suggested certain doubts, certain observations, nothing more. If others chose to believe them and spread them further, that was hardly my doing alone." "You planted the seed, knowing full well how it would grow," Alistair said, "and you continued cultivating it for months, isolating her from the very friends who might have offered her comfort during her illness. I have spoken with 2 women who confirm your involvement directly. Do not insult me further by continuing to deny it." Constance's shoulders sagged slightly, the fight draining from her posture as she realized the futility of further denial. "What do you intend to do?" "I intend to end our engagement," Alistair said, the words landing with a finality that seemed to settle the matter entirely in his own mind, even as he spoke them for the first time aloud. "I cannot marry a woman capable of such calculated cruelty, particularly cruelty directed against the mother of my own child." "Alistair, please," Constance said, her voice taking on a desperate edge he had not heard from her before. "Think of what this means for both our families. The scandal alone would be devastating. Surely we can find some way to move forward without—" "There is also the matter of Miss Hartley," Alistair continued, ignoring her plea entirely. "I found a passage in this letter, referring to her by name, suggesting she must not be permitted to remain long enough to become inconvenient. Perhaps you would care to explain that as well." Constance's expression shifted again, something colder and more calculating, replacing the desperation of moments before. "The governess has grown far too close to you, and your daughter, Alistair. Surely you can see that. I merely wish to protect our future household from unnecessary complications. You wish to remove someone whose genuine devotion to my daughter exposed the emptiness of your own affections," Alistair said. "I see that clearly now, whatever you may attempt to claim otherwise." Constance rose from her chair, her expression hardening into something almost defiant, though beneath it Alistair could see the panic of a woman watching her carefully constructed future collapse entirely. "You will regret this decision, Alistair. I promise you that. Society will not look kindly upon a duke who breaks his engagement so publicly, whatever justification he believes he possesses. I would rather face whatever scandal follows than continue building my future upon deception," Alistair said quietly. "I would ask that you leave Thornwood Hall immediately. I will have your belongings sent to your family's estate within the week." Constance stared at him for a long moment, clearly searching for some final argument that might sway him, before recognizing, at last, the futility of the effort. Without another word, she swept from the room, her earlier confidence replaced entirely by barely restrained fury. Alistair remained seated for a long while after her departure, the letter still resting on the table before him, feeling a complicated mixture of relief and lingering grief settle over him in equal measure. He thought of his late wife, of the sorrow she had endured in her final months, sorrow he had failed to fully understand or protect her from during her lifetime. He thought, too, of the strange sense of closure the confrontation had brought, a feeling that he had finally honored her memory in a way his earlier grief and paralysis had prevented him from doing. It was Mrs. Whitfield who found him there some time later, her expression gentle, with quiet understanding, as she took in the scene before her. "Your Grace, is everything settled?" "It is settled," Alistair confirmed. "Lady Constance's engagement to this household has ended. Please see that her belongings are prepared for return to her family's estate." Mrs. Whitfield nodded, though something like relief flickered briefly across her own features, before she composed herself once more. "I believe this is the right decision, Your Grace, whatever difficulty it may bring in the coming weeks." "I believe so as well," Alistair said, rising from his chair at last, feeling lighter than he had in longer than he could properly recall. "Now, if you will excuse me, I believe I owe someone an explanation, and perhaps something more besides." He made his way toward the nursery with quiet purpose, his heart lighter with each step, ready at last to begin building the future he had only recently allowed himself to imagine. Eleanor was reading quietly by the fire in the nursery when Alistair arrived. Lily already fast asleep in the adjoining room, worn out from an afternoon spent chasing butterflies and practicing her letters. She looked up at his entrance, and something in his expression must have told her immediately that the confrontation with Constance had finally taken place. "Your Grace," she said, rising quickly, setting her book aside. "Is everything all right? What happened?" "The engagement has ended," Alistair said simply. "Constance has left Thornwood Hall, and I do not expect her to return." Eleanor's eyes widened with surprise, though relief quickly followed close behind. "I am sorry for the pain this must have caused you, Your Grace, discovering such things about someone you had agreed to marry." "I am not sorry," Alistair said, more firmly than he perhaps intended. "I am relieved, more than anything. Relieved to have discovered the truth before it was too late, and relieved to know that Lily will not grow up within a household shaped by such deception." He crossed the room and settled into the chair across from her, feeling suddenly and unexpectedly exhausted, though a lightness underlay the fatigue that had been absent from his spirit for a very long time. "I must apologize to you as well, Miss Hartley. I did not fully understand, until recently, the extent of what you endured at Constance's hands during my absence. I regret not protecting you from that treatment sooner." "You need not apologize, Your Grace. You could not have known what she was capable of until the evidence presented itself." "Perhaps," Alistair said, "but I regret it nonetheless. You have shown nothing but genuine devotion to my daughter since the moment you entered this household, and you deserved far better treatment than what you received." Eleanor's cheeks colored softly, though she held his gaze steadily. "Your daughter has given me far more than I could ever properly repay, Your Grace. Loving her has never felt like a burden, whatever unkindness I may have encountered in the process." They sat together in comfortable silence for a long moment, the fire crackling softly between them, and Alistair found himself studying her face with an openness he had not previously allowed himself. "I told you once that your presence in this household had come to mean a great deal to me," he said finally. "I find that sentiment has only grown stronger in recent weeks, particularly as I have come to understand more fully the depth of your character." Eleanor's breath caught slightly, though she said nothing, waiting for him to continue. "I do not wish to speak prematurely, given how recently my engagement has ended," Alistair continued, choosing his words with careful deliberation. "But I wanted you to know that my feelings toward you extend far beyond simple gratitude for your care of Lily. I have come to admire you deeply, Miss Hartley, for your strength, your honesty, and your genuine devotion to those in your care." "Your Grace," Eleanor said softly, her voice trembling slightly with emotion she seemed to be carefully containing. "I do not know what to say to such words, given the difference in our stations, and given how recently you have endured such difficult revelations." "You need not say anything tonight," Alistair said gently. "I only wished for you to know the truth of my feelings, so that whatever happens between us going forward, it happens with complete honesty, unlike the deception that has shadowed this household for far too long." Eleanor studied him for a long moment, something soft and hopeful flickering across her features, before she allowed herself a small, genuine smile. "I confess, Your Grace, that my own feelings have grown in ways I did not entirely expect, nor entirely intend, given the circumstances of my position here. I have tried, these past weeks, to maintain proper distance, aware of how inappropriate such feelings would seem given your engagement to another." "That engagement no longer exists," Alistair said softly. "No," Eleanor agreed, "it does not." They sat together for a while longer, speaking of smaller, gentler matters, of Lily's progress with her letters, of plans for the coming autumn, the conversation flowing with an ease that had been entirely absent from Alistair's interactions with Constance throughout their entire engagement. When at last Eleanor rose to retire for the evening, Alistair found himself reluctant to see her go, though he said nothing further of his feelings, content for now with the honesty they had already exchanged. In the days that followed, the household at Thornwood Hall settled into a new and gentler rhythm. Word of the broken engagement spread quickly through local society, generating precisely the scandal Constance had warned him of, though Alistair found himself largely unbothered by the whispers and speculation that followed. He had expected some difficulty, some social consequence for his decision, and he bore it with quiet equanimity, secure in the knowledge that he had acted rightly. Constance, for her part, retreated to her family's estate, and though rumors occasionally reached Thornwood Hall regarding her attempts to salvage her reputation through alternative connections, she made no further attempt to contact Alistair directly, nor did she return to challenge his decision. Whatever fury she had displayed in their final confrontation seemed to have settled, eventually, into a resigned acceptance of circumstances she could no longer control. Alistair found himself, in the weeks that followed, spending increasing amounts of time with both Lily and Eleanor, the three of them settling into a comfortable domesticity that felt more genuinely like family than anything he had experienced since his wife's passing. He watched Eleanor with growing tenderness as she guided Lily through her lessons, as she comforted the child through occasional lingering moments of grief for her mother, as she brought warmth and stability to a household that had, for too long, existed under a shadow of neglect and quiet unhappiness. He did not rush his feelings, mindful of propriety and of Eleanor's own careful nature, but with each passing week, he found the certainty of his affection growing steadier, more assured, a quiet counterpoint to the turbulence and deception that had defined his engagement to Constance. He began to imagine, for the first time in years, a genuine future built upon honesty and mutual devotion, a future he had not believed himself capable of imagining again after the loss of his wife. Autumn settled fully over Thornwood Hall, the gardens shifting into their golden colors, and with the changing season came a gradual healing that Alistair had not thought possible only months before. Lily's laughter filled the halls more frequently now, her earlier sadness replaced by the steady security of a household finally free from tension and deception. She had grown close to Eleanor in ways that extended beyond the ordinary bond of governess and charge, though Alistair noticed, with quiet happiness, that his own relationship with his daughter had deepened considerably as well, no longer overshadowed by his earlier grief and distraction. One afternoon, while walking together through the gardens, Lily looked up at her father with the particular directness that only children seem to possess. "Papa, do you love Miss Hartley?" Alistair nearly stumbled over the question, caught entirely off guard by his daughter's perceptiveness. "What makes you ask such a thing?" "You look at her the way the prince looks at the princess in my storybooks," Lily said matter-of-factly, as though stating an obvious truth requiring no further elaboration. "And she looks at you the same way, when she thinks no one is watching." Alistair laughed softly, crouching down to meet his daughter's eyes properly. "You are far too observant for someone so young. Is that a yes?" He considered the question seriously, aware that his answer mattered a great deal to the small girl watching him with such earnest curiosity. "I believe it might be, yes. Would that trouble you, if it were true?" Lily shook her head firmly. "I like Miss Hartley very much. I think Mama would like her too, if she could see how kind she is to us." The words struck Alistair with unexpected force, and he found himself blinking back sudden emotion at his daughter's simple, generous wisdom. "I believe you are right," he said softly. "I believe your mother would like her very much indeed." That evening, once Lily had been settled for bed, Alistair found Eleanor in the small sitting room adjoining the nursery, mending a small tear in one of Lily's dresses by candlelight. He watched her for a moment, before announcing his presence, struck once again by the quiet grace with which she moved through even the smallest, most ordinary tasks. "Miss Hartley," he said finally, and she looked up with a soft smile that had become increasingly familiar and increasingly precious to him over recent weeks. "Your Grace, I did not expect you this evening. I find myself drawn to your company more often than perhaps propriety strictly allows," he admitted, settling into the chair across from her. "Though I confess, I have ceased to be troubled by such considerations." Eleanor set aside her mending, studying him with careful attention. "You seem to have something particular on your mind tonight, Your Grace." "I do," he confirmed. "Lily asked me today whether I loved you. I found myself answering honestly, perhaps for the first time allowing myself to fully acknowledge what I have felt growing within me these past weeks." Eleanor's breath caught softly, her hands stilling in her lap. "And what did you tell her, Your Grace?" "I told her I believed it might be true, and I find, sitting here with you now, that I believe it entirely." He reached forward, taking her hand gently in his own, feeling her fingers tremble slightly at the contact. "I love you, Eleanor, not out of gratitude alone, nor out of convenience, but because you have shown me, through your quiet strength and genuine devotion, what true partnership might look like. I have not felt such certainty about anything since before my late wife's passing, and I find myself deeply grateful to have discovered it again. With you." Eleanor's eyes filled with tears, though her smile remained bright through them. "I have loved you, I think, for longer than I properly allowed myself to admit, even to myself. I did not believe such happiness would ever be possible for someone in my position, and yet here we are." "Here we are," he agreed softly, lifting her hand to press a gentle kiss against her knuckles. "I do not intend to waste any further time. I wish to marry you, Eleanor, properly and honestly, with nothing hidden between us." "Your Grace," Eleanor said, though her protest carried little real resistance, more habit than genuine objection. "There will be talk, given the difference in our stations, given how recently your engagement to Lady Constance ended." "Let them talk," Alistair said firmly. "I care little for society's opinion when weighed against genuine happiness, both my own and Lily's. She adores you already. She has told me as much herself, quite plainly, only this afternoon." Eleanor laughed softly, through her remaining tears, the sound warm and genuine in the quiet room. "Then I accept, Alistair, with great joy and gratitude, whatever difficulties society may choose to place before us." They sat together for a long while afterward, speaking softly of the future they intended to build together, of the wedding they would plan properly this time, free from deception or hidden agenda, and of the family they would continue nurturing in the years ahead. Alistair felt, for the first time since his wife's passing, a complete and settled happiness, untroubled by the shadows that had haunted him for so long. News of the engagement spread quickly through local society in the days that followed, generating precisely the gossip Eleanor had anticipated, though far less severe than either of them had feared. Many within their circle, having heard whispers of Constance's deceit through channels Alistair never fully traced, found themselves quietly sympathetic to the Duke's decision, understanding intuitively that genuine character mattered a great deal more than mere social standing. Mrs. Whitfield, when informed of the engagement, could not entirely contain her delight, embracing Eleanor with unguarded warmth, entirely unbefitting the formal boundaries of household hierarchy, though no one within Thornwood Hall seemed inclined to comment on the breach of propriety. The staff, having watched Eleanor's quiet devotion to Lily over the preceding years, greeted the news with genuine celebration, recognizing in the match a rightness that Constance's engagement had always somehow lacked. Constance herself, upon hearing the news through the swift channels of local gossip, sent no word of congratulation nor complaint, retreating instead into whatever new schemes her ambition might yet devise elsewhere. Alistair found he no longer thought of her often, the wound of her deception healing steadily beneath the warmth of his new happiness, though he remained forever grateful for the clarity her betrayal had ultimately provided, clarity that had led him, however painfully, toward the genuine love he now embraced, without reservation. The wedding took place on a bright morning in early spring, nearly 6 months after Alistair had first found his daughter weeping in the nursery, alongside the woman who would soon become her mother. Thornwood Hall had been transformed for the occasion, its halls filled with fresh flowers, gathered from the very gardens where Alistair and Eleanor had first allowed their affection to bloom, and the small chapel on the estate grounds overflowed with guests, eager to witness a union that local society had, in the month since the broken engagement, come to regard with genuine warmth and approval. Lily, dressed in a gown of soft yellow, walked ahead of the small procession, scattering flower petals with great seriousness, her expression radiant with the particular joy of a child who understood, in her own simple way, that something wonderful was happening within her family. Alistair watched her from where he stood, waiting near the altar, his heart swelling with gratitude for how thoroughly his daughter's happiness had been restored over the preceding months. When Eleanor appeared at last, walking down the aisle in a gown of pale ivory, simple and elegant, in a manner that suited her perfectly, Alistair felt his breath catch entirely, struck once again by the quiet, steady grace that had first drawn him to her, in that darkened nursery so many months before. She smiled at him as she approached, and he found himself smiling back without reservation, all traces of the grief and uncertainty that had once defined him entirely absent from his expression. The ceremony itself was simple, conducted by the estate's longtime clergyman, who had known Alistair since childhood, and who spoke warmly of the genuine devotion he had witnessed developing between the couple over recent months. Alistair found himself scarcely able to focus on the formal words of the ceremony, his attention entirely captured by Eleanor's steady gaze, by the promise of the future they were building together in this moment, free from deception, free from calculated ambition, built instead upon genuine and mutual love. When at last the ceremony concluded and they were pronounced husband and wife, the small chapel erupted into warm applause, and Lily rushed forward immediately to embrace them both, her small arms wrapping around their legs with unrestrained joy. Alistair lifted his daughter into his arms, holding both her and his new wife close, feeling in that moment a completeness he had not believed himself capable of experiencing again after the loss of his first wife. The celebration that followed extended long into the afternoon, filling the grounds of Thornwood Hall with music and laughter in a manner the estate had not witnessed in years. Mrs. Whitfield oversaw the festivities with evident pride, occasionally dabbing at her eyes with a handkerchief as she watched the couple move through the celebration together, clearly overcome with happiness for the family she had served so faithfully for so many years. As evening began to settle over the estate, Alistair found a quiet moment, alone with Eleanor, in the same garden where they had first begun to recognize the depth of their growing affection for one another. Lily had finally succumbed to exhaustion after a full day of celebration, currently being tucked into bed by Mrs. Whitfield herself, leaving the newly married couple a rare moment of solitude amid the ongoing festivities. "Do you remember," Eleanor said softly, taking his hand as they walked slowly along the familiar garden path, "the first evening you found us in the nursery? I never imagined, in that moment, that such sorrow would eventually lead us here." "I think of it often," Alistair admitted. "I believe it was the moment I truly began to see you, and to understand how much my household had been lacking before your presence within it. I am deeply grateful, even now, for whatever fortune led me to that doorway at precisely that moment." "As am I," Eleanor said, resting her head gently against his shoulder as they continued their slow walk beneath the darkening sky. "I never expected such happiness for myself, given my position and circumstances. I am endlessly grateful you saw past such considerations to recognize what genuine devotion might offer." They paused beneath a particularly beautiful arch of climbing roses, the very spot where Alistair had first begun to acknowledge, if only to himself, the depth of his growing feelings for the woman beside him. He turned to face her fully, taking both her hands in his own. "I promise you, Eleanor, that whatever future lies ahead of us, it will be built upon complete honesty between us, always. I have learned, through painful experience, precisely what deception can cost a household, and I intend never to allow such shadows to darken our home again." "I promise the same," Eleanor said softly, her eyes bright with unshed tears of happiness. "Together, I believe we shall build something truly lasting, something worthy of the love we have found." They remained in the garden a while longer, speaking softly of the future they intended to build together, of the children they hoped might yet join Lily within their growing family, of the quiet, steady happiness they intended to nurture within the walls of Thornwood Hall for many years to come. As the stars began to emerge overhead, casting their gentle light across the garden where their love had first taken root, Alistair felt, at last, that he had found his way completely out of the shadow of grief that had once defined him, guided by the steady, unwavering devotion of the woman who now stood beside him as his wife. In the years that followed, Thornwood Hall became known throughout the county not merely for its ancient beauty, but for the genuine warmth and happiness that seemed to radiate from every corner of the estate. Lily grew into a bright, confident young woman, secure in the knowledge of her parents' unwavering love, and in time, 2 more children joined the family, filling the halls with laughter that had once, so many years before, echoed instead with quiet sorrow. Constance Ashworth, it was later learned, eventually secured a match with a minor gentleman of modest fortune, her ambitions considerably diminished by the scandal that had followed her broken engagement, though she never again attempted to trouble the family she had once sought so desperately to join through deception. Alistair thought of her occasionally, though without lingering bitterness, grateful, in the end, that her betrayal had led him toward a happiness far more genuine and lasting than anything her calculated ambitions could ever have provided. And so it was that a household once shadowed by grief and quiet unhappiness found itself transformed, in the end, into a home defined by honesty, devotion, and enduring love, all beginning from a single evening, when a grieving father paused outside a nursery door, and finally allowed himself to truly see the quiet strength and genuine care of the woman who would, in time, become the heart of his family entirely.